This really helps us to explore one of the key themes of the exhibition, which is how diamonds have been deployed by monarchs and other rulers over the centuries.
A single piece of jewelry, one quiet morning in a palace vault, and a decision that would send shockwaves through the British monarchy that are still reverberating today. The Jubilee brooch, heavy with history, dripping with symbolism, and worth far more than its gemstones, changed hands in a moment that left one royal humiliated and another elevated to unprecedented heights. But the most stunning part? The woman who made it happen did so with such calculated precision that by the time anyone realized what had occurred, it was already too late to stop it. Royal watchers are calling it the most significant power move since the Queen's death. But what really happened behind those reinforced vault doors? And why did Princess Anne's decision cut so deep? The vault beneath the palace, where history waits in silence. Late in 2022, while Britain was still mourning the loss of Queen Elizabeth II, something extraordinary was unfolding beneath Buckingham Palace. Deep below the grand state rooms, behind reinforced doors and climate-controlled walls, the royal jewel vault stood in its usual stillness. Can you imagine it? Row after row of velvet-lined drawers containing pieces that had marked coronations, jubilees, weddings, and decades of duty. Each drawer a capsule of history, each piece carrying the weight of moments that shaped a nation. This wasn't just a storage room. This was where the monarchy's soul rested between public appearances. And on one overcast morning, Princess Anne arrived, not as a ceremonial figure, but as the Queen's most trusted steward. She moved with purpose, dressed simply, without pageantry. This wasn't her first visit since her mother's passing in September 2022. As the review of Queen Elizabeth II's collection continued, Anne had taken on a central role, guided by memory as much as responsibility. Every drawer she opened carried weight, but one in particular drew her attention almost immediately. Inside, a dark velvet case rested the Jubilee brooch. Its central sapphire, deep blue and unmistakable, caught the light even in the subdued vault. Diamonds framed it in a floral pattern that symbolized unity across the realms Elizabeth had served for over 7 decades. Anne lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight in her hand. And in that moment, something shifted, because this wasn't simply a jewel she was holding. This was a weapon, the request that changed everything. Here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. In recent days, Anne had become aware that interest in the brooch had surfaced elsewhere. Camilla, now Queen Consort, had mentioned it privately to King Charles during an unremarkable afternoon tea at Clarence House. The setting was calm, familiar. Over fine china and soft light, Camilla spoke thoughtfully about Queen Elizabeth II and the milestones that had defined her reign. In that reflective mood, she suggested that wearing the Jubilee brooch would be a fitting way to honor the late Queen's jubilees. It wasn't an unreasonable thought. After all, Camilla was now Queen Consort. She had worked tirelessly to earn her place in the royal family after years of public scrutiny. Wearing such a significant piece would cement her position and show continuity with Elizabeth's legacy. Charles listened with understanding. He appreciated his wife's desire to honor his mother's legacy. At first, there was no resistance in his response, only acknowledgement that the idea made emotional sense. The suggestion moved quietly through palace channels until it reached Anne. And when it did, Anne paused. Think about what this moment meant. Camilla, the woman who had been vilified for decades, who had fought tooth and nail for acceptance, who had finally achieved the title of Queen Consort, was asking for a symbol that would validate her position in the most visible way possible. But Anne's mind was already made up, and what she was about to do would humiliate Camilla in the most aristocratic way imaginable, through silence. The line. Anne refused to blur. When Anne learned of Camilla's request, she didn't react with surprise or irritation. She didn't need to. For her, this wasn't a personal matter, nor was it a judgment of Camilla's intentions. This was about something far more important, the future of the crown. Anne's reasoning was shaped by precedent, not sentiment. Historically, certain jewels were worn by many, circulating through the family based on preference and occasion. But others followed a direct line tied to the future of the crown. The Jubilee brooch belonged to that second category. created in 1977 to mark Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, a celebration of endurance after difficult post-war years. The brooch was later enhanced in 2002 for the Golden Jubilee, reflecting 50 years of service. These weren't just parties or photo opportunities. These were defining chapters of a reign that shaped the modern monarchy. To Anne, this placed the piece in a different category altogether. It wasn't a consort's ornament meant to rotate with changing roles. It was a reign-defining artifact bound to continuity rather than convenience. Its meaning stretched forward, not sideways. And here's the critical distinction that Anne understood better than anyone. There's a difference between being queen consort and being the future queen consort. Camilla held her position through marriage to a king. Catherine would hold hers through marriage to a future king. One marked the present, the other marked the future. Anne did not summon Camilla. She did not challenge Charles directly. There was no confrontation, no need for raised voices or firm declarations. Her authority came from clarity, and in her mind, the path was already drawn. The Jubilee brooch belonged with Catherine, Princess of Wales. Not because Catherine was more deserving, but because she represented what the brooch had always symbolized: continuity across generations. By holding to that interpretation, Anne quietly redrew a boundary that had never been written down, but had always been understood. Her decision wasn't a rejection of Camilla herself. It was a rejection of the idea that every symbol must follow title alone. Some symbols followed time, what the Jubilee brooch really represents. To understand why Anne's decision felt so definitive and why Camilla's exclusion stung so deeply, you need to understand what this brooch truly carried. Its value was never rooted in sparkle alone. Commissioned by Garrard and Company in London in 1977, the Jubilee brooch featured a central oval sapphire, deep blue and steady, framed by a floral arrangement of pavé-set diamonds, with subtle gold accents woven through the design. Every element was intentional. The sapphire symbolized endurance and calm. The diamonds represented unity across the realms Elizabeth served. On June 7, 1977, the brooch entered public memory. Queen Elizabeth II wore it during her balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace, standing before cheering crowds as aircraft passed overhead. Photographs from that day captured more than ceremony. They showed a monarch confident in her role, visibly connected to her people. The brooch sat prominently against her pastel gown, instantly linked to that defining image of her reign. But here's what makes this piece truly extraordinary. Elizabeth didn't reserve it only for grand occasions. She wore it during moments that mattered to her: state banquets, important meetings, and quieter family gatherings. Those close to her recalled how she would sometimes comment on its weight or adjust it herself, treating it less like an heirloom and more like a familiar companion. It reminded her of promises kept and responsibilities still unfolding. In 2002, as the Queen marked 50 years on the throne, the brooch evolved with her reign. To honor the Golden Jubilee, it was reset with additional sapphires, carefully integrated into the original design. The update didn't change its identity, it deepened it. The brooch now carried two milestones within a single form: 25 years and 50 years, turning it into a visual record of service. It could trace the arc of a reign without words. This was why Anne's decision felt so inevitable to her. The brooch didn't belong to a momentary role. It belonged to the long road ahead, carrying the story of a reign forward, waiting to rest where that story would continue, rather than conclude. And Camilla's request? It represented exactly what Anne was determined to prevent: the confusion of present position with future legacy, the moment that sealed Camilla's fate. By May 2023, Princess Anne's decision was ready to move from intention to action. The setting was Kensington Palace, chosen not for grandeur, but for meaning. The Oak Room, warm and familiar, had long been a place for private family moments, rather than public display. Catherine, Princess of Wales, arrived first. Her entrance was unassuming, marked by composure rather than anticipation. She wore a simple, elegant outfit appropriate for a private gathering. William stood beside her, offering quiet reassurance. Though neither spoke much, they understood this wasn't an occasion that required words. It required presence. Princess Anne entered shortly after, carrying herself with the same steadiness that had guided her through the months since her mother's passing. In her hands was a small navy velvet case. The Jubilee brooch rested inside, unseen but felt by everyone in the room. There were no attendants calling attention to the moment, no speeches prepared for reflection. Anne stood facing Catherine, her expression calm and resolved. When she spoke, her voice was measured and direct, shaped by duty rather than sentiment. She spoke of her mother, not at length, but with precision. She reminded Catherine that Queen Elizabeth II's collection was never about decoration. Each piece carried purpose, responsibility, and expectation. The Jubilee brooch, she explained, marked defining chapters of a reign and belonged with the future it was meant to support. As Anne opened the case, the brooch caught the light instantly. The deep blue sapphire and surrounding diamonds appeared unchanged, timeless. Catherine stepped forward without hesitation. There was no visible surprise, only humility. Anne pinned the brooch carefully to Catherine's lapel, adjusting it slightly, just as Elizabeth once had done herself. The gesture was deliberate, almost reverent. In that quiet action, the message was complete. The humiliation Camilla couldn't escape. Now here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Camilla and King Charles entered the oak room shortly after the brooch had been pinned to Catherine. Think about that timing. Think about what it meant. Camilla walked into a room where the decision had already been made, the transfer already completed, the future already decided. She wasn't consulted. She wasn't given advance warning. She arrived to face a fait accompli. There was no tension in their expressions, at least none visible. Camilla's smile was composed, her manner gracious. She understood what had been decided without needing it spelled out. Charles, lifting his teacup in a small gesture of approval, recognized the continuity his sister had protected. But make no mistake, this was humiliation wrapped in aristocratic politeness. Camilla had expressed her wish for the brooch. That wish had been heard, considered, and rejected. And the rejection wasn't delivered through confrontation or explanation. It was delivered through action that made any protest impossible. What could she say? The brooch was already pinned to Catherine's lapel. The decision was already visible. Anne had simply moved forward. This is how power operates at the highest levels. There are no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet, irreversible actions that reshape reality before anyone can object. The moment passed without discomfort, at least on the surface. Conversation turned to memories of Elizabeth's jubilees. Laughter surfaced briefly. Reflections were shared. But the significance remained. Camilla had been denied the one symbol that would have cemented her place in the monarchy's visual history, and she had been denied it in favor of the woman who would one day replace her in prominence and importance. The quiet shift, nobody announced. Once the moment in the oak room had passed, life inside the palace resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet beneath the calm surface, the significance of what had occurred began to move quietly through Kensington Palace. Nothing was said openly, but nothing needed to be. Those who had spent years reading the unspoken language of the royal household understood that something important had settled into place. In the corridors and service rooms, staff exchanged brief glances as they went about their duties. A housekeeper paused while arranging a table, murmuring to a colleague that Princess Anne had done what she always did, kept faith with tradition. A senior footman, careful with his words, remarked that the brooch now rested where it belonged. These weren't rumors fueled by curiosity, but acknowledgments shaped by familiarity. The palace had seen many transitions, and this one carried the steady mark of continuity. Later that evening, away from the formality of shared spaces, William and Catherine had a moment alone. The nursery lights at Kensington Palace cast a warm glow as the sounds of their children drifted softly down the corridor. Catherine touched the brooch once more, still adjusting to its presence. It felt heavier than she had expected, not in weight, but in meaning. William reminded her that his aunt's choice was about the future they were building for George, Charlotte, and Louis. It wasn't simply an honor, he said, but a sign of trust. Catherine nodded, understanding that what now rested on her lapel carried expectations that would unfold over years. not days. That same evening, Princess Anne began the drive back to Gatcombe Park. As the palace receded behind her, her thoughts turned inward. She reflected on conversations she had once shared with her mother about the purpose of royal possessions. Elizabeth had been clear that these objects were never owned in the ordinary sense. They were held, protected, and passed on with care. Anne felt certain she had followed that guidance. There was no triumph in her expression, only quiet resolve. Camilla's composed acceptance. At Clarence House, Camilla met the news with composure. She did not question the outcome. She did not allow disappointment to show. Having navigated years of public scrutiny, she understood the distinction between personal feeling and institutional meaning. The Jubilee brooch had found its place, and she accepted that without protest. But let's be honest about what this acceptance really meant. Camilla had spent decades fighting for her position. She had endured public hatred, media vilification, and constant comparison to the beloved Princess Diana. She had slowly, painstakingly rebuilt her reputation and earned her place as queen consort. And now, in one quiet gesture, she had been reminded of a fundamental truth. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how gracious she became, no matter how many royal duties she fulfilled, she would never be the future. That belonged to Catherine. In the days that followed, Camilla continued her public duties wearing her own collection, including pieces long associated with her role. There was no signal of rivalry, only adjustment. But the message had been received loud and clear. Publicly, nothing appeared altered. No statements were issued. No explanations offered. Yet within the royal family, roles had been subtly realigned. Catherine's position as the future queen consort had been reinforced without spectacle. Anne's role as guardian of continuity had been affirmed once more. And Camilla's acceptance demonstrated stability rather than strain. The absence of conflict was in itself the message. The monarchy had moved forward without fracture, guided by respect rather than resistance. When the symbol finally spoke to the world, the meaning behind Princess Anne's decision remained largely unspoken until the moment the Jubilee brooch returned to public view. That moment came in June 2023, during one of Buckingham Palace's traditional garden parties. More than 8,000 guests filled the lawns, the air heavy with roses and freshly cut grass. Catherine, Princess of Wales, moved calmly among them in a pale blue silk outfit, composed and attentive. Pinned neatly to her lapel, the deep blue sapphire of the Jubilee brooch caught the afternoon light. For those who recognized it, the message landed instantly. There was no formal announcement, no guidance from palace officials. Still, cameras lingered. Commentators noticed. Since Queen Elizabeth II's death, the brooch had not appeared on any other royal, and its placement was unmistakably deliberate. Catherine wore it with ease, as though it had always been part of her story. Within hours, images spread widely. Observers described the moment as subtle yet decisive. The brooch had entered a new phase of its life, and everyone understood what it meant. But the real power move came days later. Trooping the color in June 2023 drew crowds to the mall, and millions more watching worldwide. The royal family gathered on the Buckingham Palace balcony, a setting deeply tied to Elizabeth II's jubilees. Catherine stood beside Prince William, their children close, the picture of continuity. Against her tailored pale blue coat, the Jubilee brooch shimmered once more. For many watching, the connection was unavoidable. This was the same balcony where Elizabeth had worn the brooch decades earlier to mark milestones of her reign. Now it rested on the woman expected to one day stand at the heart of that scene. Can you imagine what Camilla felt, watching from her position on that same balcony? Seeing the brooch she had requested now gleaming on Catherine's chest at the most symbolically significant royal event of the year? The humiliation wasn't loud. It was precise, calculated, unavoidable. The public verdict, a decision celebrated. Reaction followed quickly but remained measured. The Daily Telegraph described the brooch as a signal of continuity, pointing to its careful reappearance at moments linked to the crown's future. The Times focused on the historical weight of royal heirlooms and the clarity of their placement. Across social media, the response was immediate. Images of Elizabeth wearing the brooch in 1977 and 2002 were shared alongside photographs of Catherine, drawing clear lines across generations. Praise centered on Catherine's ability to honor tradition without excess. For a brief period, discussion of the Jubilee brooch trended, driven more by admiration than controversy. And here's what's truly remarkable. Nobody publicly questioned why Camilla wasn't wearing it. Nobody needed to. The answer was self-evident. Catherine represented the future. Camilla represented the present. And royal symbols don't just mark the moment, they mark the trajectory. Later that year, the brooch appeared again at a state dinner at Windsor Castle in autumn 2023. Catherine arrived in an emerald evening gown with the Jubilee brooch set prominently at her shoulder. The atmosphere was formal, attended by international guests, diplomats, and senior members of the royal household. Conversations paused as eyes were drawn to the familiar sapphire. Vogue highlighted the craftsmanship of the piece. The Guardian described it as a visual confirmation of succession expressed without words. Notably, no competing narrative emerged. Queen Camilla continued her duties with composure, wearing jewels long associated with her role, including the Burmese ruby tiara on appropriate occasions. The contrast was clear but not confrontational. Each woman carried symbols suited to her position, and the balance held. The hidden power Princess Anne really wielded. For Princess Anne, watching these appearances confirmed what she had already understood during the Vault Review months earlier. The brooch had found its place. There was no backlash, no confusion, only recognition. The public understood because it had been shown, not explained. But let's talk about what Anne actually accomplished here, because it's far more significant than simply deciding who wears which jewel. Anne redrew the lines of succession symbolically without needing King Charles's explicit approval. She reinforced Catherine's position as the monarchy's future without diminishing Camilla's present role. She protected her mother's legacy while shaping the next generation's image. And she did it all so quietly, so efficiently, that by the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already set in stone. Think about the power that requires. Anne doesn't hold the throne. She isn't next in line. She doesn't have the formal authority of the monarch, but she had something more valuable. She had her mother's trust, the weight of tradition, and the moral authority that comes from a lifetime of unwavering service. Camilla could request, Charles could approve, but Anne could decide. And her decision was final. This is the real story behind the Jubilee brooch. Not just about who wore it, but about who controlled its meaning. About how power moves through symbols. About how the future is shaped not through proclamations, but through quiet, irreversible gestures. What this really means for the monarchy's future. As Catherine continued to wear the Jubilee brooch at key public events, its meaning expanded. It no longer belonged only to the memory of Elizabeth II's reign. It became a bridge between past celebration and future responsibility. Without ceremony or statement, succession had been signaled as continuity. The Jubilee brooch had always marked time, but now it marked direction. And here's what we need to understand. This wasn't just about one brooch or one moment. This was about Princess Anne establishing a precedent. She demonstrated that symbols matter more than titles, that continuity matters more than courtesy, that the future of the crown takes precedence over the comfort of the present. Every time Catherine appears wearing the Jubilee brooch, Camilla is reminded of her place in the monarchy's timeline. Present, yes, respected certainly, but not the future. That distinction, subtle, unspoken, but absolutely clear, is everything in royal hierarchy. Anne didn't humiliate Camilla through cruelty. She did it through clarity. And in the world of royalty, that's far more devastating. Because there's no appealing clarity. There's no arguing with tradition. There's no overturning a decision that perfectly aligns with centuries of precedent. Camilla asked. Anne answered. And the answer was Catherine. The question we all need to ask. So what do you think this quiet transfer of the Jubilee brooch really signals? Is it simply about honoring tradition? Or is it something more? A deliberate power play that put Camilla in her place while elevating Catherine to new heights? Does Princess Anne's decision represent the guardian of continuity protecting her mother's legacy? Or does it reveal something darker about the hierarchy within the royal family? That no matter how hard you work, if you're not born into the direct line, you'll always be reminded of your limitations. And here's the biggest question. What other silent decisions are being made right now behind palace walls that will reshape the monarchy's future before we even realize what's happening? Think about it. If Anne could transfer the Jubilee brooch without Charles's explicit approval, what else can she control? What other symbols are being quietly repositioned? What other messages are being sent through gestures we haven't even noticed yet? The British monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years not through dramatic proclamations, but through exactly these kinds of quiet, calculated maneuvers. Power that moves silently. Decisions that appear inevitable only after they've already been made. And Princess Anne has just demonstrated that she's a master of this ancient art. Camilla may be queen consort today, but the Jubilee brooch and everything it represents belongs to tomorrow. And tomorrow belongs to Catherine. Share your thoughts. We want to hear from you. Do you think Princess Anne made the right decision? Was Camilla humiliated? Or is that reading too much into a simple transfer of jewelry? More importantly, what do you think happens next? Will we see more symbols quietly shifting from Camilla to Catherine? Is this the beginning of a broader realignment within the royal family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who loves royal drama. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter in this unfolding story, because something tells us the battle for royal symbols is far from over. The Jubilee brooch has spoken. The question is, who's listening? Click the next video on your screen for more explosive revelations about the hidden power struggles inside the British monarchy. Trust us, you won't want to miss what we've uncovered.